Hey, what's going on, everybody? Here with my good friend JP of Apex Counseling, also well known as Viking Legendary sponsors to all of our strength events at the gym, by the way, including this weekend's Viking Summer Raid. Today's conversation, we're talking about dwelling. And this is something I brought up to JP personally. I was like, I do this a lot. so I think we could talk about it. And that is just that I even have coined the term for myself, dweller. I am a dweller, and meaning that when some things get stuck in my head, I instantly think about them almost all the time. So when I brought it up, actually, initially, a lot of it had to do with particularly for me I identify as a problem solver among many things. And so whenever a problem comes up that I feel is my duty to solve, I will dwell on that and its impending solution until it is done. Like for hours or for days in some cases, which as you can imagine, can make everything else out of whack. And either not get any attention at all or not get the attention it deserves. So I'm going to go ahead and let it off to JP, kind of let him
Mhm.
give his little feedback on it. And we'll go from there.
Yeah, so we talked about this when Jerry originally said that he easily dwells on stuff, and I thought immediately, well, actually, we all are vulnerable to dwelling on things more than we really should. It's really just a matter of degrees and subject matter, but we almost all have something we're vulnerable to letting it live in our head and take up too much of our headspace. And really just then let that either destroy our mood or destroy our productivity or in some other way negatively impact us. And so, today we're going to try and talk about a couple of key ways to get out of dwelling, and give some tips for the person who knows what their vulnerability is already. They know the thing that is takes up too much of their headspace, and maybe just wants to try and have that happen a lot less. Um, so, to start off, one thing I think is really the start point is when a person's dwelling on something, it's actually important to really be able to figure out whether that is being effective or ineffective.
Mm-hmm.
Because in our head, in our brain, our brain does not do a good job. You've heard me say this like dozens of times at this point. Our brain doesn't do a good job of telling the difference between thinking about a thing and doing a thing. And so dwelling feels like problem solving. It's probably not, but it feels that way. And so we're like, yes, okay, I need to keep dwelling on this or else dot, 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 fill in the blank. But being able to take one step back and figure out, like, is our dwelling actually useful is important. So anything, if I was going to talk to somebody and say, okay, here's the thing that's stuck in your head. The fact that you're sitting with this all the time, is it doing something useful for you? Is step one. And if we think of like what are some things people like dwell on that are maybe have an even chance of being effective or ineffective, like what would they be? What's a good example pops in your mind?
Oh man, I mean, for me, one big one, for example, is this one's almost like one of the trigger phrases to go with it. But like, hey, can we talk later, or any variation of that, or what,
Oh,
like,
that's a great one for like everybody.
yeah, that's in everyone. Like, one of the younger coaches at the gym, and it's also one that's not problem solving, but that's like because it's like when it's an out of my control, other than being like, "Hey, can we talk now?" um, and because actually, I vividly remember one of the younger coaches at the gym just like a month or two ago, said like basically said that, and I was like 2 minutes into my workout, like 2 minutes into it. I had just started warming up. I was blatantly warming up. Like, I mean, it's not like it was anything else, but came up and did that. Um, and literally for the next, I actually timed my workout that day because it was like I was starting a new circuit, and it was a 28-minute workout, just short and continuous. So for the next 26 minutes, I was just playing that in my head. And it turned out to be like nothing, nothing. It was like, I kind of also was like, why did you didn't have to ask that question. Like, it turned out to be nothing, but in my head, I was just like, I stuck on it, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But I know
What?
in general that any version of, hey, we need to have a talk, or hey, can I ask you a question when you have like things like that can get stuck.
That's exactly right, because that's man, love relationships. Your partner says we need to talk. Your boss emails you and says, "Come see me, please." Like I feel like this is a dwelling thing for everyone.
Mhm.
And so let's take step one, which is, is there some way that my dwelling is useful to? Because like let's say my boss, well, back when I had bosses, I don't anymore, but let's say my boss emails me and says we need to talk. If I have a good clue of what we need to talk about and I need to get my stuff straight in my head, maybe dwelling on that is useful. Maybe like, oh, okay, I know he wants to talk about the Smith account and there was a mess up on that, so let me get it chronologically straight in my head so I can explain it. Okay, maybe dwelling is right in that moment because maybe there's something useful to be gained. But if you're like, if the same thing happens, hey, we need to talk, come to my office, and you run through your head and you're like, okay, I cannot possibly imagine what this could be about. Dwelling now is useless because you can't extract
Mhm.
value from it. So really knowing that it's useless is actually step one. Like being able to say, okay, since I cannot predict what this is about, me like letting it take up my headspace is not going to be useful to me. Is number one. Now that does not automatically make it go away, but the recognition that it's useless at least gives you now a starting point because now you can start to try and get out of that dwelling headspace.
Yeah,
Um,
how applying that goes to kind of getting used to that. Because when I think about it, a lot of times, the the dwelling effect happens when there seems to be like a disconnect between my intent to solve it or the person's intent to solve it or at least reach a conclusion, I guess would be a better way to put it. And the possibility of of that external factor giving you what you need, whether it is another person hearing back from them, having a conversation, or it might be, something that has nothing to do with those, but it's just process based, which at the same time I feel might help. Like I don't want to hijack and throw in too many branches, but on the one version, like on the version that okay, this is based on somebody else, and I don't know when, is a client asks a question, I I give them the information they want, and then I'm just waiting until I hear back, you know. So depending on the type of question, that might be stuck in my head. And I never have any idea when they're going to respond and what their action is going to be.
mhm.
Um, but let's say it's more systematic. Like let's say it's I don't know, like a financial or a bank thing, and I do something there, a process, and it says, okay, this will be done in 3 business days. The fact that that's a black and white answer for when it will happen will help me not dwell on it. I may still not like waiting, but like for whatever it happens to be, but I know when it is, so there's not that mental like latching on to the issue.
Well, so you said one thing, but you've brought up a good point about dwelling, especially as it relates to other people, uh, because oh, this will be done in 3 business days. That puts your mind at ease somewhat.
Mhm.
Unless, of course, somebody has said, oh, this will be done in 3 business days before, and it's not done, or if that's the
Yeah.
pattern. Here's what you're really saying. You're really saying that one of the things that people can dwell on. I mean, you were saying you, but really, this is people. This is not a Jerry thing. This is everybody. Is we'll easily be vulnerable to dwelling on how to get someone to do what we want,
Ooh, yes.
and that is good to recognize as a zero sum game because there's really no way to get someone to do what you want. Uh, but me saying that has almost no power to help people stop dwelling on it. The part that actually can be helpful is knowing what are the things that you can do to stack the odds in your favor. So, one thing that I love telling people, tell my clients this all the time. If there was a way for one human being to say words and make another person think, feel, or behave differently, I would know it. Because that's literally my whole job is to help people think, feel, and behave differently. So if like there was magic words that could make an addict stop using, I would know those words and I would say them and then they would be clean and it would be great and amazing.
That's great. Yeah. It's good
But
transparency.
yeah, but we love to make up in our head that like, okay, I'm gonna sit here and I'm gonna think for 3 hours on how to make this person
Oh, man.
do the thing I want them to do. And
Yes.
and the fix, the reframe to practice. It's not going to be like, now I know this and I will do it perfectly every time. But the thing to practice is it's not about how to make them do anything. Because all you can do to any human being ever is you can give them information. Now, you can skillfully arrange the information. You can change the tone in which you present it. You can change the order in which you present it. You can change the timing in which you present it. But that's it. The only thing I do to help people change their behaviors or their thoughts or their feelings is I present information, but I very carefully decide how to present it and when and in what tone and in what order.
So, do you think it's fair to say that in a way, and actually, side note, also, I'm fidgeting a lot because I am sitting on a really hard stool.
He's not uncomfortable because I'm like getting him. He's
Because, yeah, it's like
hardwood is hard to sit on.
yeah, recently moved into this house. The chairs are not here yet. And if I wanted a table, this is my option. So I'm sitting here. I was like, man, I am moving a lot. It's like,
Well, hey, you know this because I have a swivel chair. I'll sit here and talk, and I'll do this like a
I
40 year
actually
old.
picked up on that more so because I'm doing all this. But okay, so like in a way, I hadn't thought about this. Would you say that a lot of this, like dwelling, so to speak, is kind of is a form of impatience? When you said that you can't
Let
necessarily
me
get,
meditate on that for like 2 seconds because that's a good question. Yeah, I would say that much of it could easily fall under some version of impatience. Yeah.
okay, because I almost yeah, because I was thinking about it, just yeah, with like if I okay, well, so here's kind of a next question with it. When seeing these types of thought patterns emerge, do you notice like any precursors that tend to develop like have developed into it? You know, it's very unlikely to actually see it developing, I would imagine, unless this is what you've been studying itself. But are there any precursors that you feel like would lead into this? Either as an adult you start dwelling more as things happen, or maybe it's even as like a younger, you know, as a kid or an adolescent, and maybe there then at that point like impatience takes hold first, and as things become more bigger important as an adult, you struggle to make up that gap between just things having a real turnaround, like not having control, like you said, etc. Yeah.
Well,
Kinda digging
really,
in this deeper than I expected to, but the stuff you're saying is making me, like, see these wedges.
yeah. You're asking perhaps even a more complex question than you realize. So I'm going to try and carve away as much of the complexity as I can. Um, uh, so basically, everything that causes us to dwell has something to do with the story we're telling ourselves, our beliefs that somehow us dwelling on it is going to be helpful. Now, how does that story develop? Oh, goodness. I mean, there are 700 ways that story can develop. But really, it all boils down to that we have somehow invented that if we sit and ponder it long enough, or if we be mad about it long enough, or if we worry enough, that somehow it will change the outcome or it'll make us better at affecting the outcome or that it'll do something for us. So in a way, one of the things that I'm kind of inviting people to do today is to step away from that belief that dwelling on things, especially as it relates to getting other people to do what you want, is effective at all. That thinking about it or overthinking it is probably actually a trap instead of a solution.
Okay. Okay, that makes sense. And actually, going to take that. And one of the things you told me before was about when the dwelling can be effective. To kind of give a counterpoint, so we can really see where this goes. And you brought up the story of my Amazon trip.
Yes. Yes,
Yeah,
I even as it was happening, like I could tell it was bugging you, but like, and actually for anybody who didn't get to see this a couple of years ago, Jerry had this situation where he kept ordering the same book from Amazon, and they kept sending him the same wrong book like 4 or 5 times. And he turned it into this kind of thing on social media, where all right, attempt 4 to get this book from Amazon. Um, and I could tell how much it was bugging you, but at the same time, you were turning it into content and you were making it funny, and like people were watching it, and like it was getting to be Friday, and I was like hungry to see the next step. I was like, oh shoot, what's going to happen today?
it's like, yeah.
And, and so I was like, well, shoot, man, I can't say that this is
Mm,
ineffective because even though it's bugging you, it's actually kind of working too because it's you were turning it into advertising for your business, and then it eventually really worked for you because the author just sent you a whole damn box set of
yeah.
all the books. So that was like a wonderful example of dwelling that is not so much a problem because even though it was a bit of a splinter in your mind, uh, it was not being clearly destructive. Like I would say there was maybe a little destructiveness to it, in your private time, but you were somehow generating something useful out of it. So, net result looked pretty good from the outside. You're the final arbiter of how it was, in the whole process. But uh, yeah, as I was watching, I was like, this is working. I'm not gonna tell them to do anything different.
Lemonade out of lemons, man. um, but yeah, like I feel like I mean, I said when you said that, I'm
Well,
like,
actually, but before we move on from that, though, it is good to say,
mhm,
uh, dwelling being effective is what happens less often.
right.
So if you're evaluating for whether or not your dwelling is being effective, know that the odds are it's not, and don't accidentally, I wouldn't want the viewers to make up a story. They're like, oh well, see, look how it's being effective. If that's not precisely true, because the odds are it's not.
Yeah. So taking that with what we're looking at, okay, so taking the combination of the effective dwelling actions with the trying to control something, trying to in your story, would you what okay, let me just say this and you tell me what you think. So, well, like anytime that you have one of these situations that you do get stuck on, but I said you can't control this final outcome, or at least not in the time you would like. Um, but if it's something that you look at and you can take, and yeah, just like turn it around, package it, either make a story out of it, either do something else with it. It's hard to say what it would be exactly because I'm in my world. So in my mind, I think of it as like packaging it into a story, but just simply doing anything else with this thought or process if you can. Do you think that would normally be possibly productive or just somebody fiddling their thumbs while they're waiting?
So I think a good way to think through it is if somebody's going to dwell on stuff, but then turn it into behaviors. You have to have some way to measure the internal cost, and only that person themselves can measure the internal cost. Um, since it's an example many people are reasonably familiar with, let's look at a couple of different celebrity types. So rappers, most rappers clearly, at least in their early to mid career, are really making angry raps about how they grew up in a lot of cases, right? It's a very usual trope for rappers. Now, they're dwelling on a thing, but yet they're turning it into something that is productive, that is successful, that makes them money. But there's a thing that us as external people cannot measure, which is the internal cost of doing that. And I would not have a good way to give someone to measure like how do you feel about the internal cost of that? Same thing with people who can like channel their rage into like a sport, like pick any MMA fighter. probably one of the ways they psych themselves up for a fight is revisiting old traumas or who knows what, like really kind of dwelling, or if their opponent said something mean about them or their mother or something, like really kind of trying to bring that to the forefront. That might be a productive, successful behavior. But what's the internal cost of doing so? How much is that really setting them up to be an angry person in general, or to have the habit of dwelling on things unnecessarily? So that's a very long way of working back around to your question of externally. Yes, things can be very, very useful if you dwell on them and know how to channel that into a behavior. But since there's always an internal cost to that, it is wise to try to measure that as best you can for yourself. And it's hard for an external person to help you measure that.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So I'm going to purposely cross over to a previous talk we've had. It's like we covered letting go before, and it doesn't hurt to hear it again. Just like a 2-minute thing. We've talked about dwelling with that something happening later, or you just can't let go. You think it's a problem you need to solve, whatever. But what about the type of dwelling that is such as somebody like just made a comment, something happened, whatever it is, but it's in the past, and you're dwelling on the past and not being able to let go. Again, for anybody listening, we've had an entire episode on this, but again, just that that brief synopsis again of the bullet points, like, hey, these are some things to do to try to minimize your dwelling time on this.
Yeah, and this is a classically difficult one. So I'm going to deliver the fix, knowing that many people will not be able to implement it without some assistance from either a counselor or somebody. But here's what the ultimate goal is evaluating. Okay, here's this thing. Somebody said something to me. Is there some way I can, through dwelling on this and through thinking about it more, impact my present or future behavior beneficially? So let's say maybe somebody says something mean to me, and I'm thinking through it. I'm like, okay, did I do something? Did I hurt that person? Did I make them mad? And through dwelling on it, maybe I decide like, oh, okay, well, I don't really know what I did, but let me just check on them and offer them an apology, maybe, or something. Then maybe dwelling on it is slightly useful because now it impacts my present or future behavior. But if you can't use it to meaningfully change anything that you're going to do or meaningfully impact the relationship, then the ultimate goal would be to say, well, okay, this is information I can't use in any way, so I need to not be taking up my processing space with just endlessly thinking about this information in circles, because that's what we really do if we let these social things get into us, is we'll think through them in circles but never actually do anything useful with it.
God, yeah. And I think that seems to be so often the key, is whether or not we're actually doing something with it in the end, rather than just sitting there thinking about it, which is what so many of us naturally end up doing. it's,
Yeah,
it's that
and
natural
actually,
fascination.
you can use this in the reverse too, because a lot of times somebody will do something to us, and we'll sit there and we'll think, what, that person's such an asshole, and we'll let it get in there. But what is us thinking about that? Is it going to impact our present or future behaviors? Almost never is that actually going to happen. So same thing, the ultimate goal is to try and put that out of your head with the recognition that you're not going to do anything with it. But that is often easier said than done, especially when somebody has done something to us, because then you've got ego insults like we talked about in the
Oh
last
yeah.
one.
hmm So something I feel like every once in a while I hear somebody mention is they'll set like timers for themselves, almost like mentally, or in some real case, like if they're going through something that they don't like, whether it is like just getting ticked off, like something is bugging them and dwelling them, and basically it's this idea of, I'm going to give myself permission to just sit there, think about it, hate it, not like it, be sad, whatever the emotion is going to be, that reaction, that visceral response for 60 seconds or 5 minutes. You like I said, just pick a timer. But I'm going to give myself permission to do this. But when that timer hits, it's done. It's in the back, something like that. Type of thing that sounds really cool. Some people say that it works very well for them. What is like an experience some experiences you may have seen for people who have actually does this work for some people? If it does, kind of any advice for maybe how they made it happen? Can it work for anybody, or is it just a certain type of mentality that gets it done?
Well, let me attack one thing right there that I've always got to throw in there. Any psychology technique is not going to work for 100% of the population.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing that you're mentioning is actually, and I would have to find the research to comment further on it. But I have this really extensively long list of interventions with that you can do in counseling. And then there's a marker next to each of the ones that have been clinically validated through research. That's one of the ones that's actually clinically validated.
Awesome.
Setting aside a worry time or an angry time or something, it apparently at least has enough research to it that in my big book of interventions, that one is marked with this is an evidence-based practice, which because it doesn't work for me, I was actually quite surprised at that. So it actually doesn't work for me. But yes, this is a very powerful tool for a lot of people to just set aside a time, uh, and especially for grief, and that one's really much better for everyone. But yeah, for anxiety and anger and stuff, if you just can't push it away, lean into it and see if that works, and just like you said, either set a timer or one of the things that is popular right now is those smash rooms. There's one over across town, right?
Yep.
I mean, that's really what you're doing when you go into that. You're leaning into your anger for the 30 minutes you're in there, so much so that you're breaking physical objects. And many people report a great deal of relief after that.
Yeah. I don't even remember what it was, and I think we talked about this too. I know I told you the story 4 or 6 months ago. Yeah, something just really aggravated me at work, and I was just like, "I'm gonna go break something. I'll be right back."
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, we had like a junk
It was a fridge, wasn't it?
outside. I mean, just a junk equipment cabinet that didn't have anything in it. Just
Oh, that's right. It was a cabinet.
threw it down, hit it with a hammer a few times. Like, I feel better. I feel great.
Yeah, and because I think you either videoed it or something, because you just smashed it with a hammer about 4 times and walked off, and you were good.
Exactly. I was like, oh yeah, exactly like that. All right, so kind of to finish it up, here's what I'm curious. I became curious about the very, very beginning of this. If we're stuck on this thought, like these things, what about the kind of the mechanics of the opposite, or how could we possibly make the opposite happen, which I imagine would be being on cloud nine, just because dwelling
dwelling on the good.
Yeah. So when you have that, what would be someone, because I feel like at least when thinking about this, that hadn't crossed my mind at all until you and I started talking about it on this broadcast today. And I was like, this is almost always like a problem thing. This is stuck in my head. But what about that? Because since from the health standpoint, it would be fantastic to dwell on the good as opposed to the bad. And I feel like that might be almost what being on cloud nine is in a way, is a prolonged, heightened version of thinking about the good.
So that is a terrific question. Dwelling on the good is extremely difficult, and I'm not going to say impossible, but so close to impossible that it's very difficult to achieve with any regularity, because our brains are oriented to find problems. And that's how we survived. Our brains would figure out problems as they occurred or before they occurred. And one of the reasons that we dwell. is because our brain is identifying a problem. Hey, we need to talk. And trying to turn it into a survival level problem that we then
Yeah.
solve before we go into this horrifying survival situation that isn't really a horrifying survival situation. Uh, but that said, there are practices that you can do that help your brain orient towards the good, and that help your brain deorient from the bad. And there's a few ways you can actually capture the euphoric feelings and keep them over a short term if you kind of design it well and work hard. So what's funny is like a lot of the things that will help you orient towards the good are things that sound kitschy and cliched, but are totally legit. How many successful people do you know that have like gratitude practices?
I
Uh,
wrote that note.
Yep.
It's like,
And that's one of the things, because what you're doing is you're intentionally orienting towards the stuff
yep,
that's good.
it's real.
And it's hard to orient towards the stuff, some of the stuff that's good, because once we get used to it, it's hard for us to continue to orient to it as good. Like the simple fact that we have running water and electricity, and I can jump in my horseless chariot and go run errands, like to us seems too mundane to be grateful for. And so you almost have to work hard to express gratitude that like you live in the era of human history where that's one of your options. So that's why gratitude practices are one of the ways. There's dozens of ways, but like, finding things to enjoy, mindful enjoyment. Mindful eating is a very popular thing right now, and that's one of the things because you're orienting towards the pleasurable sensations of food, especially if it's like stuff you really enjoy. So instead of watching television while you're, eating something delicious, like sitting and really being present with the sensations, those kind of things. And if you Google, a lot of those things, they come up very immediately. But really finding ways to orient towards the good on a regular basis, but it has to be intentional because your brain will never unintentionally orient to the good. Except, and here's the other thing you can build into health. Novel things you orient towards the good. So first time I ever went to the beach in my adult life, it was like a crazy new experience for me. I have never sat and just stared at the waves. And I have never like taken a nap in, under a beach umbrella with wind blowing over me and all this stuff. So it was all like new sensations. It's very easy to orient to the euphoria and the joy of it and to have gratitude for it. But because it's novel, when it's no longer novel, just like our running water and our lights, we have to intentionally have gratitude for it. So the person who wants to kickstart it has to seek out a now novel experience to really kind of dwell on something that's good, happy, or joyous, or euphoric. And that's one of the few ways your brain will automatically do it.
Awesome. I think we actually just kind of might have figured out one of our topics for August too. that's where I
Sweet.
wrote, that's where I wrote those notes. Was in that little portion there, the content stuff.
So,
Um,
let me recap where we are up to this point, because sometimes you and I talk so much that the bullet points get lost. I want
yeah,
somebody to be able to use this. So recognizing when if you're dwelling, whether it's helpful or unhelpful, with the weight towards that it's probably unhelpful, and then trying to intentionally push it away if it's unhelpful is going to be one of them. That's very hard for some people. Um, and then there's a third one that's very, very much easier for people to do, which is if you can switch to a problem that dwelling on it will actually be impactful or helpful. What you can do is you can hijack the brain mechanic that is trying to make you turn something that you can't help into a survival situation, and you can hijack it into thinking about something that's helpful for you. So like, oh man, I want my bank to respond to me, and they simply will not respond to me, and I can't make them do it. Okay, well, fine. I can't impact that outcome at this time, but shoot, I need to shoot this commercial or this video, and I need to write the script for that. Writing the script for it is a thing that you are in control of. And so, if you can trick your brain into dwelling on that thing that you have much more control over, sometimes you can't get your brain to be positive, but if you have to choose between effectively negative and ineffectively negative, you can choose ineffectively negative, and that's at least much more beneficial.
Okay. Awesome, man. All
Or
right.
you can
Thank you
choose
so much.
effectively negative. Sorry.
No, so like I said, because I feel like I said this was a more personal topic request, so I appreciated this a lot. So all right, man. Like I said, like good times again. Everybody who is listening, again, as always, hope you got something out of this or able to apply it sometime in the future. So again,
And
this
thanks
is
for hanging out with us.
Garrett. You got it, and we'll be back in a couple of weeks.
See
See
y'all.
you guys.